Right, welcome back to Chameleon Productions. If you've been keeping up with our videos, you'll know that in the past 3 weeks we've been doing a 3-part croissant making competition series. So in the last video, Guillaume did his taste test of the croissants and we ranked them all in order, and in this video what we're going to do is outline different little things that we learnt along our journey in order to help you at home make the best croissants that you can. But first, before we can do any of that, I need to hand over to Guillaume, our resident Frenchman, who's going to tell you exactly what he thinks the perfect croissant is. Take it away, Guillaume.
So in my mind, I think a good croissant has a good amount of layers and a good color, a good nice golden color. You definitely don't want to burn it, but ensure that it has a nice sort of crispy color to it. The texture, you want to try and make sure it has a good amount of layers and bubbles inside the croissant. That crunchiness, but not too much. For the flavor, you want to try and go for something that's quite sweet. Obviously, you don't want to put too much sugar, but you want a lot of sweetness. Use good high quality butter. When tasting the croissant, you can really taste that butteriness. You want to try and perfect that.
Right, thanks for that, Guillaume. And now let's move on to the tips. So, tip number 1, make sure you have the right ingredients, the same quality as a good croissant would have. So, for example, let's take the flour, right? The flour needs to have between 11 and 11.5% protein. That's very important. If you have too much protein, your croissant won't rise when you leave it to prove. And if you don't have enough protein, it'll collapse in the oven. So make sure you have 11 to 11.5% protein. And on that same note, when it comes to the butter, you want to make sure you have butter which has at least 82% butter fat or milk fat. You'll see different names for it. Just look at the back of the ingredients list and make sure it says 82% fat.
Tip 2. Don't rush the dough. If you think it's alright, it's not. You gotta make sure it's absolutely perfect, otherwise it will not work, and you will only realize when you bake your croissant and the butter falls out, straight out of the croissant. I know from personal experience, shall we say, with multiple failed batches where I got the dough wrong, so make sure it's absolutely perfect.
Tip 3. So one of the most important ingredients you'll find is the yeast. Bad yeast ruins the dough immediately. I would recommend getting live yeast because once I got live yeast, every single batch rose without fail and there were no problems and I was very happy.
Tip number 4, once you've incorporated your ingredients into the dough, it needs to be kneaded. So make sure you use a dough mixer for this. I'll tell you why, okay? You can get 2 different types of dough mixers depending on how much you're willing to spend on it. You can get, number 1 is the sort of KitchenAid type, and these are quite expensive, but you know what? Kneading the dough with one of these should take 8 minutes. Alternatively, and this is what I used, you can get just a regular kitchen mixer and you can get dough hook attachments for it, right? And these will take about 15 minutes to knead the dough. Your third option is if you have 2 of these, but these take ages to knead the dough with, ages, okay? So don't use these, it's a waste of life, okay? You're gonna have bad dough, you're gonna have lumpy croissants, they're not gonna rise properly. Just get a dough mixer, it'll save you time, effort, and stress.
Tip 5. Make sure you have an even butter square. You want the butter square to be perfectly even so all your layers when laminated can be also even, because otherwise you could have problem with proofing as some layers might be heavier than others, and also you could get a little bit of cracking if the layers aren't even. Tip 6. Make sure you've got the right butter temperature. You don't want to be so warm so that when you put it on the dough, it just melts into the dough. Your croissant is ruined. The moment that happens, it's over. You better restart. But you don't want to be too cold, because if it's too cold and you try and fold it, it will just crack. And then it's also ruined again. So you need to get it about right, just to make sure cold enough so that it can fold, but not too warm so that it will melt.
Tip number 7, temperature regulation. This is so important, temperature regulation. As we've just mentioned, the butter needs to be at the right temperature. It needs to be just pliable enough that you can fold it and roll it, but not too hot that it melts. And the easiest way for temperature regulation is to just, while you're laminating the dough, put some frozen peas or something on top of the dough with a layer of like kitchen paper or greaseproof paper, something in between to keep it dry, and just let it cool. You want the dough, while it's during lamination, to be between 12 and 18 degrees Celsius.
Tip 8. When doing your first batch, after rolling out the croissants, I'd recommend trying to split them up and prove them in different locations. This way you can easily find out which area of your house works best. So I found the boiler room worked really well for me, but you might find the oven is perfect. And you just minimize the number of failed batches before you get a good one.
Tip 9. Just make sure that you get your proofing right. A recipe might say 2 hours, but if after 2 hours your croissants don't look like they're fully proofed, then let them leave there a little bit longer. Just make sure they're absolutely right, otherwise butter will fall out of the croissants while cooking. Once again, I've got a lot of personal experience with that. So make sure they're just right. A tactic is they gotta wobble a little bit when you shake the croissants. Then you know that you've got about the right proofing.
Tip 10. To get that really nice shine at the end, I'd recommend coating it fully in the egg wash. And don't be afraid to run out of egg wash. You can always just follow your recipe and make a bit more. But to get that really nice croissant-y bronzy color, you need a lot of egg wash.
Great point, Thomas, and that moves me right on to tip number 11. As you've got a nice even coating of egg wash on your croissants, you want to make sure you only put it on the flat bits and not on the vertical bits. That way it can rise properly, and that way as well, it doesn't prevent the layers from coming out when it cooks. So make sure you only put the egg wash on the horizontal parts but not on the vertical parts. Very important. Do that.
Tip 12. Make a lot every time you make the croissants. First of all, it's a lot of work. You want to eat lots of croissant at the end. However, it also will help you improve faster because you'll have more chance to practice with the dough and rolling and all the stages, and so you will also reach a good croissant quicker.
Tip number 13. Start small and go big. What do I mean by this? Well, on your first few batches, it doesn't really matter what the size of the croissant is. If you get a small croissant, that's fine, you know. Just start with as many as you can, nice and small. So for example, in my first batch, the width of the croissant was about like 9 or 10 centimeters, and the length, I'd say, was about 20, right? But by my final batch, I had 15 centimeters in width and 30 in height, okay? That's very important. You want a nice big triangle of dough for your final batches. That way you get the proper size and shape of your croissant. So 15 centimeters in width and 30 centimeters in length. Remember that.
Tip 14. When you see that your croissants are getting nice golden brown in the oven, just cook it a little bit longer because the insides will not have been fully cooked yet. But also keep checking because otherwise you risk overcooking it and then it'll taste bad. Also, don't trust necessarily what a recipe says. My recipe said 30 minutes in the oven at 190 degrees C. It was cooked after 15. Just keep checking it because it's up to you to make sure it's absolutely perfect.
Tip 15. Once you start getting things that look like croissants and people are starting to, gobble them up very quickly, I would recommend trying to focus on the ingredients to take your croissants to the next level. So especially try and get French ingredients. So the main ones would be getting better butter and better flour. So you want to look for high percentage fat in your butter, and you want to get T55 flour. Ideally order them from France. So if you want to make a very special batch, I'd order them, maybe takes 5 days to come, but then it does make a huge difference and you can really taste the difference. And I'm not talking about the Tesco kind. Anyway, back to the studio.
Thank you, Thomas. Good point. Now for the recipes. So personally, I used 2 recipes. So I used the dough from this recipe and I used the lamination method from this recipe. Okay, so check those both out. They're great. Thomas and Edward's links for their recipes will be in the description below if you want to see those as well. Make sure to check those recipes out and try making some croissants yourself. I promise you won't regret it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe so that you can stay up to date on all of the latest Chameleon Productions releases. Comment below telling us what you thought about this video, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye.